no soldier goes to war without the weapons of war. Otherwise, is doomed to die. We know that a nurse has to put on a certain outfit and has to, have certain training in order to be a successful nurse. And so in the Christian life, you don't just become a Christian and, you don't just become successful. It is something that you have to learn the art of, and God in his wisdom has set principles in this life for success. So he has given us a blueprint to follow, so that if we follow that blueprint, we are bound for success. And what I can say immediately is that success is a deliberate effort. No one is successful just because they woke up in the morning and they walked around and they met a few people and, oh, voila, they're successful. Nothing like that happens. So for you to be a successful person, you have to make a deliberate effort. And obviously, you have to direct yourself to the Bible. Like I always say, the Bible is the best manual on life. And so defining success, I've always asked people, so what is success? We want to learn about personal success, the tools of the trade. What do we need in order to live through this life successfully? And I've asked people, what is success? And, a few people will say, well, if you have, made a lot of money and you have perhaps met your goals, perhaps, bought houses or cars, or you have a position of influence. Yeah, well, maybe, but the sad reality is some people actually think that they have found success or that they're successful, and yet all they've been able to do is make a lot of money. So making a lot of money does not define success. So we need to know what defines success. And that's what we're going to be exploring as we move along. All right. So first and foremost, I want to talk about principles. God created this world and he set principles. Principles do not change. Principles are the laws that God set, which help all the systems to move smoothly together. So it is a principle that God created that makes the earth go round, and that makes the earth go around the sun. It is the principle of gravity that keeps all of us here rooted to the ground and not flying all over the place. It is, so to the point that no matter how much faith you exercise or how much faith you want to demonstrate, even if you're a pastor and you go up a roof and you carry a Bible, maybe 2 hymn books, maybe 3 quarterlies, and you decide to jump off the roof, you will break your legs. Never mind that you're a pastor. Why? Because God's principles of gravity, that anything that goes up will come down. And if you just jump and you're not harnessed, you are going to break a leg. Those principles do not change. So what does that mean? It means that we have to fit into God's principles. So God has all the plants running in a certain way. He has all the animals knowing what to do, when to do. I mean, it's crazy how animals are not confused about the sexual gender. No, they're not. But for some reason, human beings are. And because we have become a misfit in God's perfectly running machine, we see a lot of problems happening in the world today, be they war, be it hunger, be it desertification, you name it, because human beings have stepped out of God's plan, out of his principles. Now, you see, principles are so important for us to, first of all, acknowledge them, to know them, because if you do not abide by the principles, those principles will kill you. Now, let me just tell you a small story. I love to tell stories. So I heard about this naval captain who was leading his army, and that was in the US. And he would train his army in such a way that they had to do a mock war. So, you know, in order to sort of train them out at sea, they had to be in two teams. And the one team, you know, maybe it's team red and the other one is team blue. And they use rubber bullets and they use paint to show, you know, that is a bomb that is blasted. And so they would go out, you know, in the worst type of weather, so as to train their resilience and their being able to handle a bad situation. So this particular captain went out, you know, they call these war games. Okay, so they went out and they were having these war games, and they could go for days, even months, because wars can go on forever. So while they were out there, somehow they lost the campus. And so they could not tell which way was north, which way was south, which way was east, west. And because they were worried about using up their fuel, they decided just to let the ship sail, right? And so as they let the ship sail, they went on for hours. And after a while, they were hoping that they would reach land, of course. And after a while, they saw a light out in the distance. And, you know, they figured that, of course, it was another ship. And so they sent out a signal. And this signal said, please change your course 5 degrees or else we will collide. And they waited to hear a signal back and they did not hear anything. But the light was moving dangerously close to them. And so the captain sent another message. Please, we are a ship, we're a naval ship, and we belong to the US government, and we were out doing war games. Please, can you change your course 5 degrees or else we will collide? Again, silence. Now, as the light was drawing closer, the captain was getting desperate. And he sent out even his credentials. He says, I am a decorated captain of the naval Army of the United States. And I represent President Ronald Reagan. And I ask by that authority that you change your course 5 degrees or else we will collide. And eventually a message came back. And the message said, and I am a lighthouse. Now, who do you think had to change their course 5 degrees? They didn't know that they were fast approaching a lighthouse. And when you have a lighthouse, you have cliffs. So they were actually in danger. And they are the ones who needed to change their course 5 degrees in order to avoid collision with the cliffs. Now, the cliffs do not move for you. The lighthouse will not change for you. It is you who has to change. You have to turn your life. You have to make decisions that go along with God's principles, or you will be destroyed. And so I'm going to be telling you about, you know, the 7 P's. Okay, I just chose P's, all right, to personal success. And everything that God plans, if it's children's ministries, if it's youth ministries, if it's education, if it is men's ministries or family life, everything that God does, all those programs should always lead us to our salvation. All right. So even this year, I want to tell you about business, how to be savvy, how to survive, and how to, you know, conquer, you know, this mentality sometimes that we have that tends us to poverty. Okay. And we're going to get all those principles from the Word of God. All right. So I love the Bible because it is so relevant to every situation. One of my favorite verses come from Deuteronomy 8, verse 18, right? And this one says, you shall love the Lord your God because it is He who gives you the power to make wealth. Wow, I thought that's amazing. God is the one that gives you the power to make wealth. Wow, we're going to be exploring that a little more, but that obviously tells you that to God, it's important that He has Christians who are wealthy. Now, I'm not here to preach prosperity gospel, but I can tell you that salvation is free, but the gospel is expensive. So you don't need to pay anything to get saved, but you need to pay plenty money to get the gospel out there. All right. And because of that, we need a ready purse in the church. And I've noticed that, our elders and our pastors are in trouble. Whenever they want to talk about, people supporting the church with money, they first of all have to, organize these extended crusades. They have to invite powerful speakers in order to persuade people to get money out of their pocket and support a cause or give it to church or return it to the Lord. That's a sad state of affairs. And I've always asked myself, like, why is it that in our church, and that's the Seventh-day Adventist church, and perhaps many churches at that, why is it that we just sort of mediocre in the way that we make money? We don't really have people who are like billionaires, and millionaires or multimillionaires. No, I don't know what it is with our mentality. We almost feel that there's a holiness that comes with poverty, and I don't believe that God intends for people to be poor or to just be average, in order to show that they're Christian. And sometimes I feel that by our, let me still refer to poverty. By our poverty, we are misrepresenting God. I mean, I look at Abraham. I think Abraham, wow, man. I mean, that man had an army to go and rescue Lot. He had an army and he was fighting, I think, against 3 kings. How huge was Abraham's army? And yet when we talk of Abraham, just like, oh, Father Abraham, like he was just some guy who lived down the road. No, he was an extremely wealthy man. We look at Isaac. I mean, Isaac's army grew to such an extent that Abimelech went and said to him, my friend, I think look for a place of your own. You and your people and your army have grown too big for us. I mean, I like to imagine the Zimbabwe National Army, and I'm thinking, imagine if I had so much influence, so much wealth, to the point that I even have an army. My security is just like an army, to the point that our president in Zimbabwe comes to me and says, your army is now too big. It's now competing with my army, the national army. Please find somewhere else to go. How great were those people? You think of Job. What's the first thing that God says about Job immediately after I'm describing that he was a man, who feared God and eschewed evil? The next thing he says, he had so many, camels. He had so many asses or donkeys, or he had so many sheep, and his children had their own palaces, obviously, and they'll throw parties in tents. That man was rich. And so wealth is not anti-Christian. And the problem actually is the lack of wealth. All right, because when we lack wealth, we lack influence, the influence that could actually change the world. And sometimes I say to pastors, Shane, you trouble the saints, and you say, be faithful, let's have pledges. Oh, please, we want to build, or we want to have this program, we want to. And I say, the problem with us having to try and squeeze, water out of a rock, it's not that sometimes people are actually stingy or they don't want to be faithful. The fact of the matter sometimes is just they don't have money. We just don't have money. And why do we not have money? We generally don't have money because we don't have a plan. And normally it's because of ignorance. I've always said it's either because of ignorance or because of laziness. And so today, in fact, in this series, I'd like us to explore a little more about how you can be personally successful. And when you have success, money follows. Okay, when you are successful, money automatically follows. Money does not define success, but money follows success. All right, so let's move on. The first one, I'll move quickly to the first one. Okay, and the first principle I'm going to talk about is purpose. Okay, purpose is me asking you, why are you here? I want to imagine that God, being all wise and almighty, would never bring a human being onto this earth for nothing. We're talking about purpose, okay? He did not create you for nothing. It doesn't matter how you came into this world. It might have been honorable. It might have been dishonorable, all right? But if you came into this world and you came into the land of the living, God has a purpose for you. This mighty God who created heaven and earth, who made everything perfect, right? In his time, he has a purpose for you. Now think about it. If you have a cap, for instance, a cap, and you put a cap out there, and you ask someone, what's that cap for? They'll tell you, you put the cap on your head, you know, whether to protect yourself from the sun or for whatever other reason. They will not say you dish out, your lunch in a cap. Take a chair. Everybody knows that when you take a chair, it's there for you to sit on, okay? Take an iPad. Everybody knows that when you have an iPad, this is what its use is. Now, if human beings who are creating things, right? We create things all the time. We made a bed, we made bells, we made all sorts of things. And it's very clear to us that when I have a bicycle, it's there to be ridden on, not to be slept on, okay? If human beings, mere mortals, can create things which have a specific purpose, and everybody is in no doubt of what that purpose is, why do you think that God would create you for no reason? Why? That would actually turn God into a non-God. And we know that God is God and God is organized. So if you do not know your purpose yet, it is not a problem with God. It would probably be a problem with you. And no matter what your age, it's high time you found your purpose. Why? Because a successful person is a person who has found their purpose and a person who has lived out their purpose. All right. And this reminds me of another story, which is told of a little kindergartner, 4 years old, who went to church, shy little girl, goes to church. The teacher is there, and she's asking everyone what they'd like to be when they grow up. And so everybody's saying, I want to be, a mechanic. I want to be a bus driver. This one says, I want to be, a doctor or whatever. And the teacher came to this little girl and said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And she was just shaking her head. She's like, I don't know. And the teacher said, you know what? You can be anything. When you use your imagination, you can be anything. So you can choose whatever you want, you can choose. And so she sat, and thought about it and said, you know what? I'd like to be a teacher. And then the class finished. So this little girl goes home. She goes to her grandmother, who obviously was waiting to hear what had happened in kindergarten. And the little girl came to grandmother and said, Grammy, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the grandmother was like, oh, my darling, those are not questions that you ask old people like me. I'm already grown up. Those are questions that they'll ask you. And the little girl looked sternly at her grandmother and said, Grammy, you can be anything you want to be. You just think about it and you can actually name it. You can be anything you want to be. And the grandmother was quite surprised, But you know what? That is true. It doesn't matter what your age is. You can be 54 today and not have achieved your purpose. You can be 72 today and not have achieved your purpose. You can be 91 and you have not yet achieved your purpose. That means that you are not successful. You might have gotten married, you might have had children, you might have gone through school, had an education, you might even have had positions, in society that are respectable. But as long as you have not achieved the purpose that God put you on this earth for, you are not successful. And that is just the very sad reality. And that means if you find yourself at 63 and you realize that I might have done everything that I've done, I don't know my actual purpose, okay? It's high time at 63, you look for your purpose. You prayerfully ask God, God, what was the reason you put me on this earth for? You know why? Because if you live out your purpose, it will benefit you first. It will benefit your family. It'll benefit your neighborhood. It'll benefit the society, your country, even the rest of the world will know about it. And so if you don't find your purpose and you don't live according to your purpose, but you live according to other, plans, it means you have deprived this very generation of the benefit that God intended for this generation to have through you shining in your light. I hope that is very clear for everyone. Now, right. I think other people might ask today and say, but how do I get to know my purpose? God is amazing. From the time that you're born, the family that he has you grow up in, okay, the background that you have is already building towards your purpose. I'll tell you, for me, for instance, my dad died about 2 months before I was born. And because my mom had to change careers really fast in order to look after 7 little children, she sent me off as soon as I was born, excuse me, before I was a year. She sent me off to the rural areas to live with her older sister because I was that young, right? And I spent perhaps the first 5 years of my life with my aunt. Excuse me. You won't believe it. I see it now looking back that was all part of God's plan. I learned so much Shona. Shona is one of our local languages in Zimbabwe. I learned so much Shona. I was always the best Shona student, in any school that I went to. But that wasn't the point. The point was I got to know so much Shona. I was then able to preach, and I am now able to preach in Shona to people in the rural areas who do not know a word of English. And that language is not a barrier for me. So God allowed the first 5 years, not a long time, of my life to be there and to sink in all the Shona and the idioms and the idiophons and the proverbs, you name it. So now I can speak as deep Shona as I would like to speak because God actually set me there. And immediately after that, he sent me off to a multiracial school. And the Shona didn't get out, but all the English came in, okay? And why? Excuse me. So that I could reach out to people in the UK and speak to them in a way that they can understand. So I look back and I'm like, oh, wow, God was already setting me up for my purpose even before I even knew it. Maybe somebody who saw me in the rural areas might have said, oh, this poor little girl, living in the rural areas. But if they were to see me now, I don't think they'd think that anymore, right? But God allowed me to have understanding of 2 very deep languages in order to support my ministry of preaching and reaching out and encouraging many people without there being a language block. So if you look back at how God created you, if you look at how he allowed you to be nurtured, maybe it was your parents, maybe you were born into a single family, maybe you were born into a family who took you in, maybe a foster family where you lived with an uncle or whatever. All that is working together for good in order to achieve your purpose. Sometimes people will be saying, you're a person who really likes to think deeply. You're probably going to be like a philosopher. People normally speak to you that way to say, you're probably going to be, because they can see all the signs and symptoms of potentially what your purpose should be. So go home today. Don't allow yourself to sleep without begging God to know what your purpose is, because one more day that you spend living outside of your purpose is a day wasted, and it's going to cost this generation. And I'll explain further what I mean by that. So please find out what your purpose is. All right, let me move on. So that is the first P, purpose. Okay, we'll move on to the second P. We'll see how far we can go today. I think we've got about 30 minutes, so I'll try and squeeze in maybe one or two. So the second thing I'm going to talk to you about towards achieving your personal success is potential. Okay, potential. You know, when you talk of potential energy, you're talking of, you know, like a sleeping lion, like a sleeping giant, something that if it wakes up is going to roar into force. Everybody's going to hear about it. Everybody's going to know about it. There's going to be lightning and thunder, you know. And so potential is that hidden power that is within a person. If you think of, perhaps let's just say somebody who has a short temper, you know, who wears their temper on their sleeve. That person, people normally walk on eggshells around them. Why? Because they know that they can just, you know, they can just burst out without warning. Anything can upset them. And before you know it, a happy situation is now a tense moment. So we can say this person has the potential of blowing up, okay, in a way that people don't know. So people don't really want to mess around with that person, okay? So I think again of this saying which was said, I don't know, this saying has been credited to so many people, but I'll go with Einstein. And people have said that the graveyard is the richest place in this world. I'm sure you've heard something like that, that the graveyard is the richest place in this world. Why? Because buried there is so much potential that was never used. So people went to their deathbed and went to their grave without having achieved or without having used up their potential. And you know, the interesting thing now, which is quite a mystery, purpose equals potential. So whatever your purpose is, God has already put the potential in you to be that thing. So when you are born, God already, and my mom says, you know, everybody is born with their fist clenched. She always uses that example. And she says, do you know why everybody is born with their fist clenched? Not as a political sign, but each person when they're born is holding on to the gift that God gave them. And I want to call that your potential. And that gift, no one can take it away from you, but you can allow life to derail that gift. Okay. So whatever God means for you to be, or meant for you to be, He already put that in you. Let me try and explain what I mean by that. You know, let's look at the mustard seed. And I've looked at mustard seeds. They're really, really tiny. They're not the smallest of seeds, but they're quite, I think chia seeds could be a bit smaller, but they're like really small seeds, right? And if you plant that mustard seed, what's going to come out? You're going to have a mustard tree, okay, or a mustard shrub or bush, okay, it can grow to quite something. And you enjoy the fact that it grew up to be this big a bush, right? But if you were to look at the mustard seed, with how tiny it is, and then you look at the mustard bush or the mustard tree, you could almost say to God, God, you can't ask this poor little seed to become that huge tree. It is so small. How do you expect it to, you know, germinate and grow and be that huge thing? But if you think about the reality of it, and that's the beauty of God's creation, you see, God will never be as unfair as to demand from the mustard seed to become a mustard tree if He had not put the mustard tree in the mustard seed already. So the DNA, the very DNA of a mustard seed, it looks like a seed to us, but in reality, it is actually a tree. But it is packed in this little tiny thing. And if given the right environment and given the right manure, given the right opportunity, it will blossom into that huge tree and shock you that that huge tree would come out of this tiny little seed. Is that not the same with us saints? Surely God would not ask you to be a missionary going out to unknown lands if he had not planted a missionary in your DNA. God would never ask you to be a president to run a country if he had not put in your very DNA the leadership qualities. If you're not going to have a president who's being persuaded to do something all the time, a president that everybody's sort of suggesting to say, why don't we try this? That president is not going to, it's not going to last very long. But sometimes you have people who are choleric, people who are just on the ball, who know what to do, who always come up with the decisions, who always come up with, the winning suggestions. And you know for a fact that this is a leader. Why? Because God put the tree in the mustard seed. And so if the mustard seed is planted in the ground, as you have been planted in this world, right? And the mustard seed does nothing, what do you think is going to happen? It is going to rot and whittle and die. So what turns the potential energy into the kinetic energy? What turns potential into purpose? It is called work. I think it's in the Greek language. I don't know much Greek, but I have very great interest in it. There is something called ernogo, and that is the same meaning as work, okay? So the seed, as soon as it gets into the ground, has to start working. It has to start pushing. It has to start releasing the life that's in it. It has to germinate. It has to release energy, which is the energo, which is to work. And when that seed works and it is starting to bring down the roots and starting to bring out the shoots and everything, you start to see something. Now you see the purpose of the seed. That, oh, that's what it was going to come out to be. And there's nothing strange about it. The minute you put a seed in the ground, the seed knows what is going to come out. If it's going to be a basil bush, it will come out as a basil bush. Right? If it's supposed to be an oak tree, it's going to come out as the seed is not confused what it is supposed to be. So once it gets into the ground, it starts to work. Now, talking about work, I think I need to just get this in very quickly. If you read Proverbs chapter 20, verse 4, Proverbs is a chapter that talks about a lot of themes. And one of the themes that are consistent throughout the book is the theme against laziness. Okay. So the Bible will say the sluggard. And in this verse, it says, the sluggard will not sow for reason of the cold. And when it comes to time of reaping, he will beg and have nothing. Now, God says anyone who has potential, I've put potential in you in order to become what you're supposed to be. But if you do nothing about it and you keep on making excuses, you will not come up with anything. Other people will start driving cars and you're wondering, they're stealing money. They're not stealing money. They're just working. Okay. And you are not going to reach your optimum. And I always ask yourself, in this life that I'm living, have I reached my optimum? Am I going to be that person who will go to my graveyard, to my grave full of potential? And God says there's some people who will not start a business because of excuses. They have 1,000 excuses, Say, at the moment I'm waiting for the kids to finish school. Oh, I'm just going through my divorce. So, maybe after that I'll start doing something. Or, I don't have startup capital. Things are really tight in the economy right now. Or, you know, no, I'm still really young and I'm in college. Let me concentrate on my books. Oh, no, 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 no. God says there should be no excuse for, you should not have an excuse for not starting a project or a business that you should start, because it's in a business that then you have the potential of making money. And when you make money, God's coffers are always supplied. Your family is always sorted out. You can even extend a helping hand and give alms to those who are poor. So there's no fashion in being poor or in being average or mediocre. You know, it's not fashionable at all. It's actually a burden to the church. It's a burden to the Lord's vision for us. All right. And I'll tell you a story of, you know, one day I used to sing in a group called Lighthouse. So I think somebody passed away, and it was a grandmother actually. And we went off to the grave, you know, to the graveyard. I think it was Greendale Cemetery, and we were going there. And as we were going, you know, we were going to bury a grandmother, but as we were stepping on the tombstones, you know, some of them are really fancy and lovely. We saw one which was written, you know, I think she had died at 87. I think that was the age. And she says, or at least what was written there, obviously by her children and grandchildren, it was, I have emptied myself. I thought that was deep, you know. I have emptied myself. This 87-year-old woman, from the eyes of her children and grandchildren, had emptied herself. She had done everything that needed to be done when she was alive. You know, if there were books that needed to be written, she had written them. If there were people who were meant to be loved, she had loved them. If there were hugs which were supposed to be given, not during this time, of course, she had hugged them. You know, if there were some songs which needed to be composed, she had done it. And her children and her grandchildren could testify that, you know, we can't even think of one more thing that Granny would have done, you know, more if she had another day. She did everything during her lifetime. Now, some of us, most of us, will get to a point where, you know, we get to our death, we get to our graves. Just what people will say about us is that, you know, she was born, she grew up in such and such a place, she got married, you know, she attained a degree, she had children, she put them through school, she had grandchildren, and then she died. That's all people can say. Imagine dying full of your potential, and people don't have anything to say about you, on how you touched lives, how you went beyond your, you know, your capacity, and you overflowed even into next generations. I like the chapter, the verse, in fact, which is John 10, verse 10, which says, the thief cometh for nothing but for to steal, kill, and to destroy. But I have come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. I know that the thief wants to steal something from you. In fact, if he can steal your potential, he's done with you. That's why he likes to have kids on drugs. That's why he wants women to get married to men who are abusive, because that drains her energy. That's why he will have a young man date a young lady who is toxic to him. Because when you are in that environment, you can never be your optimum. You are always focusing on what the thief is there to steal, kill, and to destroy. You are focusing on death, on misery. Your life is morbid. But Christ says, even though the devil plans to steal, kill, and destroy what I have put inside of you, I have come that you might have life. So not only are you going to have a life, you are going to enjoy life. And you are going to have the abundance of life. And I always wondered, what is the abundance of life? And what I discovered was the patriarchs and the prophets and the kings that we have and who are spoken of in Hebrews chapter 11. Those guys had the abundance of life. I mean, how many years later, we're still talking about them. You will not have a sermon that doesn't have at least one of them. They're influencing generations beyond their imagination. Now, that is the abundance of life. And God says, when you utilize your potential, you will overflow to places you never imagined. The president of the US will get to know about you. Not that that's your point, but because that is the natural flow of things. Let me check my time quickly. Okay, I think we've got about just 10 more minutes. Okay, so when we talking about potential, the difference between potential and purpose is hard work. We have to be willing to work hard. There's a term in Latin which says, I think I mentioned that earlier actually, laborare et orare. Simply meaning to labor is to pray. And I think I even mentioned that some people are so spiritually foolish that they spend their days and their hours on their knees praying when what they should be doing is working. So you can never turn potential into purpose without being willing to work hard. And it cannot be about making money, right? It just has to be about the joy and the love of it. Once you find your purpose, there's some, I like to talk about Thomas Edison. He just invented so many things and it was just wonderful to him. And like I'm saying, when you find your purpose, money follows, okay? Why? Because when you start to produce things that people need, people will bring their money to you. The equation is just like that. You give them what you've created, they give you the money. So money follows purpose, and purpose is not, there's no purpose where you are following somebody else's, somebody else's shoes or somebody else's footprints. You can see somebody else's footprints, but within those footprints, you find your own space, right? Which still makes you relevant for this generation. So to labor is to pray. So sometimes you don't need to pray about certain things. Sometimes you need to work. And I'm sure that I explained this. I don't want to repeat because we don't have time. But where I was saying that there is God's work and then there is man's work. And usually those two things don't really mix, but they complement each other. So man must do what man must do and must not expect God to do man's work. Why? Because man cannot do God's work. And God normally comes in when man fails. Okay, then God steps in and he rescues the situation. So work hard. Okay, the difference again, I normally ask, what is the difference between a 5-year-old little girl and a 25-year-old woman? And the answer is time. The only difference between these two people is time. If you give this 5-year-old 20 years, the potential in her will naturally start to come out. She will start turning into a woman without applying for it. She doesn't have to pray to say, Lord, now I want puberty to set in. She will be shocked as puberty is setting in. Why? Because God set everything like clockwork. So this little 5-year-old has the potential and the purpose, right? And the result of who she is seen in the 25-year-old. And I have seen with, fathers in Africa, when they have a son, they're happy because they're like, soccer team, or now we have an army. But when they have a daughter, when the child is born and it's a daughter, in Zimbabwe, we say, awana danga. We're saying he is going to be rich because of this girl. Why? Because people are already seeing this little newborn baby as a 25-year-old woman who is having lobola, or the bride price, paid for her. And so when people see a little baby being born, they see potential. And if time is allowed, that potential is going to come to fruition. There will be a young man who will bring cattle to say, I want to marry your daughter. But we speak prophetically, we speak prophetically when we see the little girl. And that means we are conscious of the potential that this little child has. All right. And so while we're talking about potential, I want you to ask yourself and say, am I going to be that person? Am I going to be that person who is going to just live my life, and die and go to the grave full of what God put in me? I want you to be curious about, what did God put in me? Yes, he said to one, he gave 1 talent, to others he gave 2, to others he gave 5. So which one am I? I cannot have at least one. God, what have you put in me which you would want me to build, which you'd like me to grow, which will ultimately feed into my salvation and the salvation of my family and service to my generation? Now, I seem to have lost my my trail. But when we're talking about potential, I think I'm going to end with potential, because at least we've got a little more time. When we are talking about potential, I have seen ladies who age before their time. Some people like to mature, to act mature, and hence they block out opportunities of things that they could do. Okay, so I've seen women who are 40 and she already looks like, she's an old hag, pardon the language. Okay, but let me tell you a little tale about my friend Eleanor. I totally loved Eleanor. When I was a student and I visited the US, I met up with a lady who was 80 years old. Okay, she's 80 years old, and she was a widow, and she was Caucasian, and she was a church member, and she was working for Walmart. And I remember asking her, Eleanor, you are 80 years old. Why are you still working? She says, oh, to feed my pets. So when I visited her house in New Hampshire, I noticed that she had, I don't know, maybe 7 cats and 4 dogs, and they were all, living together happily in one home. And she was working to feed her pets. I thought, wow, what a feisty lady. So I asked her, Eleanor, what are you doing for Christmas? For the Christmas break? And she said, I'm going to Switzerland. I was like, oh, do you have grandchildren there that you're visiting? She said, no, I'm visiting my boyfriend. I said, your boyfriend, Eleanor? You're 80, you have a boyfriend? I said, how? She said, yes. I said, how old is he? And she says he's 77. I thought, wow, that's amazing. I mean, here's this lady who did not write herself off simply because she was a certain age. She didn't write herself off simply because of how people view elderly people. If you saw her dress up, she chose her clothes well. She looked like royalty, to the point that a gentleman whistled at an 80-year-old. And yet you have some of you here who are barely 35, and they're already acting like they're over 100. Now, when we're looking at this in the context of potential, I want you to just think about it tonight, to say, have I written myself off too early? Is there still something in me that I have not achieved, which I must achieve? Do I know my purpose? And if I know my purpose, then I know that I have the potential to actually reach that purpose. And if I do not utilize my potential fully, I have not lived to the optimum that God has set for me. I hope that is well understood, saints. And let me just say one last thing there before we close. I think we've got about 5 minutes. Okay, so I was talking about the grave being the richest place. And as I said today, I want to talk about being personally successful. Okay, so I don't want to add to the gold that is in the graveyard. I don't want to add to the diamonds that are in the cemetery, because nobody can mine them. They're gone and dead, right? I want to live my life to the fullest because I am in the land of the living. And David always praised God for being in the land of the living. And I was mentioning that you need to work. This is one of my favorite proverbs. I discovered it from the Student's Companion. It says, there will be plenty of time to sleep in the grave. So this is the time to work, okay? It's not the time to sleep and to doze off and take siestas, you name it. This is time to work, because when you die, nobody's gonna wake you up for tea, okay? Nobody's gonna say, oh, yeah, now come for dinner. So work now, and then you have something to rest about or rest for when you get to the grave. All right, now I will close this segment of purpose and potential with Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verse 6, one of my favorite verses in the Bible, because that was an epiphany for me. I had no clue that you had such advice in the word of God. Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verse 6 says, sow your seed in the morning. We're talking about working, okay? So what is the definition of working? And the Bible says, sow your seed in the morning. And that means you must have a day job, okay? You must have a day job. If we ask you, what do? You say, I'm a student. Good, that's your day job. Oh, I'm a nurse. Good, that's a day job. Oh, I'm an engineer. Yes, that's your day job. Okay. The Bible says you must have an answer. You can't say I'm a stay-at-home person. No, nobody's just a stay-at-home person. While you're at home, what projects are you doing? Are you taking kids for piano lessons? You know, are you doing gardening for sale? What are you doing? You have to have something profit making that you're doing that you call your day job. It doesn't end there. It moves on and it says, but in the evening, withhold not your hand. So sow your seed in the morning, but in the evening, do something else, okay? Do something else. So God is saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you guys are in the UK or wherever else you are in the world, okay? God is saying, if you have a day job and you're working, you know, in a hospital or in a nursing home, wherever it is that you're working, that's your day job. Find something else to do. Why? Because it then continues, you do not know which one of the two will prosper. Either this or that, or both of them will work out the same. Is that not amazing? This is the word of God saying, if you are going to make money, meaningful money, don't dwell on one thing. So me as a lawyer, I'll be like, okay, but I'm a lawyer. You know, if I work hard, you know, I can survive, I can have a comfortable life. God says, no. It just means you're living half, your life, the other half you're risking. I am telling you that have a day job. So my day job is being a lawyer. But have something else that you're doing. Have another project on the side. Why? Because you don't know whether your formal employment is what is going to cut it, or your sidekick being your project, you know, that you're doing, that is going to actually be successful. And God says so. He says, you don't know, but who knows? He who gives you the power to make wealth. Deuteronomy 8:18. God is the one who knows that in another 2 years, this economy is going to be absolute rubbish. And this person is going to entirely depend on raising chickens. Okay, so why not start the chickens now while you're doing your nursing job, while you're doing your teaching job, you know? So God says, don't just have one thing that you're dependent on. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, this advice is for life. Have at least 2 things that you're pursuing. And I'm saying at least, you can do 3, don't burn out, but you can try several things. God says, I'm the one who will see which one to bless. And he says, you don't even know if one or the other will do well, you know, more than the other, or if both of them will fare alike. So both of them can actually do well. So you're making money from this end and you're making money from that end. Who's complaining about that? And I will tell you now, and I have to say this, this is not saying that you're working for, one hospital from 7 to 7, and then you're going to another hospital to work, from 8 maybe to 11 or to 12 or whatever the case may be. No, God is clearly saying, do something different. And I'll give you an example. For me, in 2008, things were really tough in Zimbabwe. I mean, there was just, no money, and our dollar had just lost value, and that was that. And I could not even have enough money to look after my family because I didn't have time to go to the bank because I was busy at work. And those who made money were those who went to the bank. And so then I remembered that, when we were growing up, my mom taught us something. My mom taught us something. She taught us to use our hands, right, to do things. So I could raise chickens. I could bake cakes and scones. I was making some mousses. So I decided, let me do this. And, I started making cakes and selling them to corporates. Do you know that with the money that I was making with cakes, I could pay all my workers, I could pay my rent, I could buy groceries. I was living off cake. The thing that the law degree could not support me with, the cakes were doing it for me, right? And beyond that, I was like, let me do chickens. So I turned my garage, said the car can, park outside, and I turned my garage into a chicken run. And we started, supplying restaurants because there was just shortage of everything. So we were supplying restaurants. Our demand became so high. We actually had to subcontract this huge farmer who was doing chickens, and he was selling us, and we could, resell. And I said, if I had just stuck it up and said, I'm a lawyer, can't be seen doing that, I would not have survived during that time. I thank God for this verse, which says, give yourself options. Don't be a person who just relies on one thing. And before you ask God to improve your finances, he says, at least show me 2 things that you're doing. Ladies, being pregnant and having children at home, that is not your day job. If it's not making money, it's not a day job. It's part of, the process of life, but it is not a day job. And you don't have to go to work in order for you to say, I'm actually, being productive. You can start your own project at home. I know there's a certain brother of mine who does amazing cloths, and he sews and everything as his sidekick, and he supplies African materials in the UK. Wow, well done, brother. But that's exactly what God is talking about. He's saying, I want you to be a person who works. You need to work. And when I say work, I'm saying have at least 2 projects. Run with those. I'm the one who will determine how they will succeed. All right. And if we look at the 4th commandment, which is a commandment that we stand by. All right. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor. Stop right there. So the 4th commandment is more about work than it is about rest. But we like to think that the 4th commandment allows us to rest. But you have to have something you're resting from. So before God gives the commandment to rest, he gave the commandment to work. He says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Immediately he says 6 days, labor, right? And then rest on the 7th day. A lot of us don't deserve to rest on the Sabbath because we actually don't work as much as we should during during the 6 days. And just talking about the 6 days, God says you should be working 6 days. Most of us, because of the calendar and because of how the governments run our countries, we work 5 days, Monday to Friday, okay? And for some reason, we think that the weekend is 2 long days of just relaxing. No, the Bible says you work 6 days, and the 7th day is the one to rest. Most of us lose out on a day a week by not working on a Sunday, right? And then if you calculate that, how many days is that in the month? That's like 4 days, okay? How many days is that in the year? That's like 48. 48, I beg your pardon, 48 days. okay, which is I think what is that? Let me calculate that again. If you're losing 1 day in a week, you're losing 4 days in a month. And 4 days times 12 is what now? It's 48. So you're losing, there we go, 48 hours rather. So you are losing 2 full days. And now imagine if you could utilize that time and you actually become productive in that time. Imagine how much more you would be profiting from if we were not losing one Sunday every week. I'll leave you with that thought, saints, that in order for us to achieve our purpose, we need to utilize our potential. Everything you find your hands to do, do it with all your heart, and God will bless your labor. And ultimately, when Christ comes, he's not going to ask how many cars did you buy. He's not going to ask how many children did you have. He's not going to ask which country you lived in. He's going to ask, did you achieve the purpose that I set you on this earth for? May the Lord bless the reading of his word.